Are you planning a home extension? May it be a renovation or diving into your first property development? Well, the UK planning system can be rather confusing at times, but don't worry, I'm here to help you get it right first time. My name's Ian Walmsley, if we've not met before, and I'm the founder of Planning Geek. And today I'm sharing around 20 essential planning tips every beginner needs to know. I'm going to be breaking this down into four sections. Section one is knowing the rules. Section two is about communication and research. Section three deals with the planning applications. And the final section deals with after submission and longer term. Okay, so let's get started. Section one, knowing the rules. And I've broken this down into 5 easy points. Number one, understanding permitted development rights. Not everything that you will want to do will actually require planning permission. So actually understanding PD rights is very important. Now, without trying to get too complicated at the first hurdle, they're actually part of what's called a General Permitted Development Order, and that was last revised fully in 2015. So we're still working off the 2015 version, although it's been updated many, many times over the last 10 years or so. So understanding what actually will fall under PD rights is quite important. So for example, if you've got a dwelling and you're looking to do a loft conversion or perhaps a single story rear extension or even a side extension, or perhaps you want to put up a shed or something similar in the garden as an outbuilding, all these are permitted development rights. Now, with any permitted development right, you may be able to just go ahead and do it, but I would advise you to check. So do a quick Google search for whatever you're looking for, or look it up on the Planning Geek website. We list over 200 permitted development rights. Okay, some of them you are not going to need. For example, erecting a mobile phone mast or something like that. You know, those sort of things are not. But you may be a farmer, so you may be looking at a new barn, for example, or you may want to extend your home. Whatever it is, even putting up a garden fence is a PD right, or even painting a house. All these are PD rights. So have a look under the PD on the Planet Geek website, and I will put a link to that in the description below. Now, one thing I would also do is perhaps is check with the local planning authority. However, there is a big thing here. Please do not ask advice of the local planning authority. Now, that may sound a weird thing to do, considering the local planning authority are there to give you permission to do certain things, but I wouldn't actually ask them for advice. This is where a planning consultant or other professionals come into their own, because local planning authorities are very, very stressed and they're overworked, and as simple as that. So I probably wouldn't advise contacting them for advice. But I would use reliable sources for your information. So I pride myself at Planning Geek on having a site that's got over 500 pages of information, and I pride myself on having accurate information. Now, I will never guarantee you that everything is 100% correct because I'm only human and I do make occasional mistakes, but I have written all 500 plus pages on the website. So it is a reliable source. I would like to think so. Okay. But just check where you get your information from. These days, it's very easy to put into an AI engine and ask for advice, but just be careful. Just be careful because the AI engine will pull information from other sites or any site in particular. But if that site has false information, it is quite possible that the AI will give false information. I have seen it myself. Okay. Now, if you aren't sure if permission is required, you could apply to the local authority for what is called a CLOPUD, Certificate of Lawful Proposed Use or Development. In other words, it's a certificate before you start to make sure your works are lawful and compliant with permitted development. However, I'm not a fan particularly of lawful development certificates before you begin. Yes, if you're really unsure about something, maybe it's okay, but I'm not a massive fan, okay? Because at the end of the day, as long as your extension or your outbuilding or whatever it is sticks to some basic rules, you should be fine. Now, the only time when I would possibly recommend a lawful development certificate before you start is where you're not sure if your PD rights have been removed. And on that subject, it's all very well saying use PD rights, but if they have been removed, you just need to be careful and be aware that those permitted development rights may not exist. Now, when you are looking at a site to develop, please beware of overdevelopment. So your project, quite simply, should be in keeping with local character. You don't want to be overshadowing neighbours or reducing amenity space, either their amenity space or anyone else's. You've just got to be aware of overdevelopment of a site. In all honesty, you can also get an underdevelopment of site. So perhaps if you wanted to, you've got some land that you're looking to build some dwellings on, or sometimes you may well find that the local authority actually want you to put more properties on that land and not less. Um, Occasionally, yeah, you may well find that. So just be aware of over and potentially underdevelopment. Okay, on to section two, communication and research. Now, one tip I often give people is to speak to your neighbours. So go round, speak to them. At the end of the day, if you put a planning application in, they will be told. They will get informed of your extensions, your whatever you're putting the planning in for, new dwellings or whatever. And by discussing your plans in advance with your neighbours can often prevent objections and smooth the process. Ask them for their input. Yep, they don't have to talk to you, but yeah, it's a good idea to actually do so. It's not a legal requirement, you don't have to do it, but it is something that I would recommend doing. Now, if you're doing perhaps an HMO, something like that, where you need to get planning permission to create that HMO, go and inform the neighbours. Go and give them an email address that they can contact you after the event in case there's any problems. You'll be amazed as to how many barriers you will knock down as a result of this. But don't give your personal email address. Perhaps do a hello at, may be your a domain name for your company or whoever. Just create a separate address for this purpose. Now, one thing you should watch out for and do some research in your area are for Article 4 directions. So an Article 4 directions will block permitted development rights. I will do a separate video in due course on Article 4 directions, but essentially at this stage, just be aware that they may exist. So common ones, for example, will prevent HMOs, houses of multiple occupancy, from being created or C4 dwellings. In some conservation areas, you may also get Article 4 directions. So just be aware. Now, importantly, please check to see what that Article 4 blocks. Okay, so it may block an HMO or it may block a fence in front of your house. It may block certain colours that you can paint your house. So they are very specific as to what they block. And importantly, they are specific in areas. Now, for some, yes, it may well be borough-wide, but other ones can be on individual buildings. So check your Article 4 map locally. You can find that. That should be on the local authority website. Reach out if you need any help on that. Now, one thing I would advise is trying to learn the use classes. Now, I will do a separate video also on the use classes in due course. But virtually every single property, building, land, or anything else you look at will have a use class. So that could be use class B, C, that's where we all sleep. It could be E, so stuff like cafes, restaurants, stuff like that in the high street and shops and bits like that. F1, F2. And if they do not fit within those, they'll be sui generis. And if you go to useclass.co.uk, you'll go straight to the use class order part of the Planning Geek website. Again, I will put a link to that in the description below. Now, just one final thing on research is that prior approval is not the same as planning permission. Okay, so when we apply for planning permission, whether that is full planning permission or perhaps a householder permission, that is different to prior approval. So prior approval is where permitted development rights need an additional tick box exercise with the local authority. And it's as simple as that. So, for example, if you've got an office to resi conversion, Class MA, or if you've got larger rear extensions, i.e. extensions over 3 or 4 meters, depending upon the property, that will need prior approval. And so it's a much simpler application than a full application. So just understand that. So they'll all be contained within the permitted development rights. Okay, so section 3, the actual planning applications. Now, if you speak to many people, especially local authorities, they will say consider pre-app advice. Now, I'm not a massive fan of pre-app advice either. You'll have gathered from my earlier comments, I'm not a fan of contacting the local authority. Okay, they're stressed and they're busy enough as it is. And quite often, I find that pre-app advice is very limited in its benefits. Okay, it's going to be the views of one officer. And believe it or not, that advice is not binding on the local authority. They can go against it. Now, importantly, also, there is no time frame for a pre-app to come back to you. So it could take weeks, it could take months. I have known in the past pre-apps take over a year to come back. And so, yes, whilst they exist, they're not always the best thing. However, if you're doing anything that's perhaps controversial, or is large scheme or something like that, then yes, a pre-app is a good idea. Now, very importantly, get your plans and drawings right. You will be amazed as to how many drawings I see which have been poorly done, have got windows missing, stuff like that. And of course, then the applications fail. So please, whoever you're working with, whether you're working with one of the Planning Geek architectural people or whether you're engaging your own architect or architectural person, and I'll be doing another video on that as well, but just make sure they're accurate. They've got like the north mark, they've got the scale and everything else, because inaccurate applications quite simply cause delays. Now, once your application has gone in and you've paid for it, you can track your application online. Most local authorities will do that. Some local authorities will also publish any objections or any support for your application. Some will keep that towards the end and not actually publicly display those until afterwards. But just keep an eye for the consultation periods that are online and any updates from anybody. And yes, you can respond to those if you wish. But what I would advise is probably as part of this process, engage a planning consultant. Now, obviously, I'm a slightly biased here because I do own a national planning consultancy. Um, but, and I would say that, wouldn't I? You'll say, but yeah, I would probably advise getting a professional involved who is competent and understands what they're actually doing. So maybe use one. But whatever you do, please be patient. A standard application can easily take 8 weeks or more. The larger or more complex projects yeah, they're going to take several months. So just be patient. Just be patient. The process can't be rushed, I'm afraid. I wish it could. That's why we have permitted development to actually sort of sideline these planning applications, if you like. But a planning application is going to take at least 8 weeks. Now, hopefully you will get an approval. We have a very good, I'm very, very, very proud of our approval rate. It's well over 90 odd percent. And so, yes, I'm quite pleased. But a lot of that is to do with the quality of the application that goes in. And that's very important. But occasionally you will get refusals. And if it is refused, then, you can appeal to the planning inspectorate. That is your right. You have a right to appeal. But please, whatever you do, understand the process and the timescales. The timescales are very, very important. Some applications you may only have a matter of days in which to appeal, sort of 28 days or so. Others a much longer period, but there will be a deadline. So understand that. More information is actually on the Planning Geek website as far as appeal timelines are concerned. Now, it's important to understand also that building regs is completely separate to planning. The two are completely different. One is, all right, both will be governed ultimately by the local authority, but they are somewhat different. Now, for structural work, electrics, insulation, stuff like that, you are going to need building approval, even if planning permission isn't required. So planning permission may not be required, but if you're doing anything that's notifiable or comes under the building regs, yes, you will need that. Now, one thing you want to try and avoid is enforcement action. All right. Please don't wait until enforcement come knocking on your door. All right. So it can get quite serious if you do. If that happens, please do reach out to us. Please get help. Don't just brush it under the carpet and ignore it. So do your due diligence on that. Understand as to why enforcement may be involved. Perhaps you've built something you didn't have permission for. Maybe a local authority has made a mistake. It does happen. Now, if you're building close to the party wall, i.e., sort of on the boundary, you may need to serve what's called a party wall notice. So that comes under the Party Wall Act of 1996. So if you need to do that, just make sure you're aware of it and serve that party wall notice if required. Now, one thing you want to make sure that you do not do is let your planning lapse. Now, on your decision notice, once you've got approval, it will say on there, right at the top or towards the top, it will say this work must be started within 3 years of the planning approval date. Now, the date will be down the bottom, but in most cases, you'll have 3 years in which to start the building works. Now, if it's prior approval, you will probably have 3 years in which to complete the works, not just start it. So understanding that decision notice is so important. And on the subject of the decision notice, please read it through. If you do not understand it, get advice because you may have what are called pre-commencement conditions. And if you've got pre-commencement conditions, you must, I stress must, deal with those pre-commencement conditions before starting work. Now, there may also be some conditions for pre-occupation or for post-occupation, but whatever they are, you must comply with all of them. If you don't, your planning might be invalid. And if you've ignored your pre-commencement conditions and you don't have time to actually get them dealt with and discharged, you can't make a lawful start and you may need to go through planning once again. So please, please, please check those dates and perhaps mark them on the calendar. and mark a date a month or two before, making sure that you've actually done that and you've actually submitted it. Because believe it or not, these do get forgotten, and all of a sudden, then planning has to be resubmitted, and the rules may well have changed. And talking about planning rules changing, keep yourselves informed. Now, there are some great sites like Planning Geek. Again, I'm slightly biased, but look for reputable sources where you can get updates and proper guidance. Now, we also have a Facebook group of 17, 18,000 people, which you're welcome to join. Again, I'll put a link to that in the description below. But you need to make sure that you keep abreast of planning changes, because if you haven't quite got your planning in and something alters, yeah, you want to make sure that your application is up to date by the time it gets submitted. Again, as I've said earlier on, please consider using a planning consultant for that application, because yeah, it may cost you 1,000 or 2,000, whatever it might cost, depends on the scheme, but sometimes that money is well spent. Now, the thing is, with planning fees now for the local authority, you do not get a second go. You do not get a second chance free of charge. So if you do it wrong and you get refusal because something fairly basic, and trust me, I see that a lot, you will need to pay those local authority fees again, which could be hundreds, if not thousands, depending upon the size of your scheme. So perhaps engaging a planning consultant may not be an expensive thing after all. And so finally, and I've said it more than once in this video, if you're unsure, please, please, please get professional help. And like anything, there are different standards of professionalism. Just because, someone's got planning consultant or architect or architectural designer or whatever on their website does not mean they're competent. You will get very, very, very good architects. You'll get very good architectural people. And as I said earlier, there is a difference, and I'll explain that in another video. But you will also get very poor planning consultants. It's true. You will get bad planning consultants. Now, all of my team, and at the time of recording this, we've got a team of 18 now, which I'm very proud of. All mine are handpicked. But you will get some poor people in whatever profession you engage. There was a phrase I coined during lockdown on Clubhouse, and if you've been with me on Clubhouse, then you probably have heard me say this more than one time. Right people at the right price at the right time. It is so important as far as getting your team right. So thanks for watching over the last 25 minutes or so, and I hope some of these tips will make you feel more confident navigating the UK planning system. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you never miss an update. And if you've got any questions or planning struggles, please drop them in the comments below. I will reply to as many as I can personally. I will guarantee that. And a lot of them I will actually do on future videos as well. So please start asking your questions in those comments. So until next time, stay informed, stay geeky. This is Planning Geek. See you next time. Bye bye for now.